Matt and Barbara, I'd like you guys to go ahead and introduce yourself, your role in CASA, and then basically from here on out, I'll keep my mouth shut.
Okay, Matt, I'll go first. Yeah, I know that surprises you. I've been a CASA for going on 12 years. I have done 14 cases, some more successful than others. I have done 2 cases for other CASA groups outside of Adams and Broomfield counties. I got lent to others. And there's differences in how each group approaches it. And it's helped me, I think, sharpen up where I like to go with my court reports. I'll let Matt talk. Matt used to be my supervisor, and I gave him a lot of grief. So that's why he has gray hair. And I have a couple of points that, Matt, after you've had a chance to introduce yourself, I'd like to just sort of start with where I start when I do court reports, because I've written many court reports.
I would say that Barbara really doesn't have a supervisor. That's sort of a misnomer. I work with her because she's as good as it gets. So anything she has to tell you, I promise, is based on a lot of experience and a lot of good feedback. And but anyway, my name is Matt Kale. I've been with CASA for about 6.5 years. I'm a senior program coordinator. I've worked with several of you here today. And I have, of course, had my own case. So I have written court reports as well as edited, but I've edited a lot of them, hundreds and hundreds of them. And I would say the best question that I've heard from anybody here so far is, how do I write a court report when the case is going well? I think everybody could write a lot when the case is a disaster, because there's a lot to say. There's a lot to say about the parents. There's a lot to say about the placement. There's a lot to say about the kid's behavior. And it just seems like the report writes itself. Those are pretty easy. But when a case is going well, or maybe it's, running towards adoption or the end of the case, how is it that you are able to write a decent report? And I think that's something we can talk about at length, because that is the hardest. And that's the number one question I get when I'm looking at reports is, well, I don't really have much to say. Before we get into it in depth, I'd say the short answer to that is, that's okay. I think a lot of CASAs assume that they have to write a lot in their reports every time. I've had CASAs in between reports that write just an update, just sort of an addendum that's maybe half a page long, and it's even a paragraph. And that's perfectly acceptable. I don't think anybody on the case, especially the judge, expects you to fill it. Volume is not what we're about here. We're about you conveying information to the court so that they can make their decisions. And if the case is stable, the child is stable, the placement is stable, it's perfectly acceptable to have a very brief update. I always tell CASAs that if they have not much to say as far as the nature of the case, maybe just then fill in with an anecdote or a particular story, something that enjoyable at your last visit that reflects the kid's personality, something like that. But I think it's important for everybody to know, especially the people just starting out, don't feel like you have to fill every single category with a bunch of information. It's not always necessary. It's case specific, case dependent. And I think as you go along, you'll see that. I mean, I use Barbara's court reports as an example, but hers are pretty long, and that's just because they had to be. Very complicated cases, a lot going on, a lot with the treatment plans, a lot of back and forth. So it was necessary, but I've had incredibly concise court reports that were less than a page that hit the nail on the head about what the case is. And the first question to me is, should I say more? And no, so you don't have to. Again, I just want to reiterate that and really hammer that home, that short reports are okay, and they're good, and they're, again, can be reflective of how the case is. So we'll start there as far as something that I think to take away from this.
So Matt, we did have a question from Jamie that asked, what kind of court hearings do not require a court report? And please refresh my mind. Can anyone in the public access these reports?
The last question, no, they cannot. The only people who are entitled to read the court report are parties to the case. So we as coordinators send it out to the judge, the department, who then gives it to the caseworker, the guardian ad litem, and the parent attorneys. If there's a special respondent on the case, like a grandparent or an aunt, they are entitled to read it, but we don't send it to them directly. But an attorney or someone else can allow them to read it. When it's sent out, and then it's also uploaded on Optima. But those are the only places these reports are. They are, of course, placed in the record. And if you were to pull the file of the case, your court report is in there. But this isn't accessible to anyone outside of the case. And it's absolutely forbidden to have anybody who's not an official party to it read it. We've had some instances where a family member asked the CASA, "Hey, can I look at your court report?" Because they met the CASA or something. And the answer to that is no. Again, they have to be named by the judge as a special respondent or a party. And as far as when you write a report, you'll write one for pretty much every hearing, as long as every hearing is beyond 30 to 45 days. When you first start out on a case, you'll see what's called a pretrial conference. Those are oftentimes when the parents haven't been adjudicated. There's no treatment plan in place. It's very early. You won't have to write a report for that. You may not write a report until 2, 3, 4 months into your case. But the standard for us is if you have a hearing that's less than 30 days from the previous hearing, we don't require you to write a report for that. You can, and I know that some do. I think Sherry said that she does because her case is heard every 30 days. You're perfectly welcome to write as many reports as you want, especially if you feel it's necessary. But we won't ask one for you. And usually the rule is about 45 to 60 days between court reports.
And the other time, Matt, isn't it true that we do not write reports is when it's a contested hearing, when
Yes.
you're going to some kind of adjudication, then we don't. And that's really so that we can maintain the idea that we are observers, we are dispassionate, we're not going to take a position and contest it, because often we may be called as a witness. So you don't want your stuff out there. It taints the hearing process.
That's correct. So yeah, if you have as Barbara said, if you have a termination hearing, you should not be writing a report for that, because as Barbara said, the respondent parent attorney could call you as a witness on the case because of something you might have said. So, like an adoption hearing too, you can, because it's the final hearing, you can sort of give a wrap up of the case, but it's not overly necessary. I mean, if it's the final hearing and everything's going, it's really up to you. But those are the instances where a report isn't necessary, and your coordinator should be telling you when to write one and when not to. But the stuff we mentioned, those are the hard and fast rules of when not to.
So Kirk asked the question, in these no change, all is well reports, we should start fresh with a short report as opposed to adding on to the prior report?
Well, I like that idea. I had a CASA, Rachel. She's ended her case last year, and I loved the way she did her reports, where she would leave what was written and then just add, because it was going towards adoption, so not a lot was happening, but it took a year for this to happen. So she would just add a little paragraph, because the hearings were only every 60 to 90 days, oftentimes 90 days. So she would leave what she wrote before and then just put a little piece in each category as she saw fit. And she would identify it because at the top of her report, she'd say, all new information in italics or something like that. The style is your choice to do. I think that's a good idea if you don't have a lot new to say. And what I think is good too, especially if it's 90 days between hearings, the feedback I've gotten is, especially the judge appreciates that you're putting in previous information, because they don't remember the report you wrote for the last hearing. So it's a refresher for them. They're like, oh, good. And it's sort of like them being able to follow from the beginning of the case to now. And her reports were very lauded by the judge for that reason. And again, they weren't too long. It's not like she was taking 3 paragraphs she wrote and then adding 6 more paragraphs. It was always a very brief addition. But I think that's a great idea if your case is sort of, hanging loose and not much is going on. That's a great way to organize it and a great way to think about it is maybe just to add 3 or 4 sentences at the end of a prior paragraph. That way you don't have to redo the whole template and everything like that too.
And if you're looking for where there's change in a case, and you're coming up on a court hearing, think about things that do not stay as static. The school situation. Has there been a grading period? Has there been something different at school? And focus on that, because if you don't have a lot of other things to say, pick out things that you might have had some change in. And as we've all noted, I love the cut and paste function, because you can just pick up what you've said and then focus on anything that might have changed and try to draw attention to that. The one thing that I think is important when you start to write your court report, what's the first thing you should write? Your recommendations, because you need to be able to give yourself the test. Did what I say lead me to these recommendations? Because if there's a disconnect, you need to start over. So start with, what's my recommendation? Hey, things are going great. We should just, allow this process to unfold a little more, or not. And so start with your recommendations and then go back and start building up. The process of writing, that's the last thing you're going to write, but it is not the first thing you're going to think about. It's not the first thing you're going to put on the side of your desk. You say, okay, my recommendation is we need a change of placement. My recommendation is we have got to get this kid evaluated better, or we need to be moving towards reunification in a more aggressive fashion. Whatever you're going to say, make sure that you know where you're headed and that you're going to bring everybody else along with you with how you write your report. I like to say that there are a couple of things. You start with your recommendation so you know where you're going, and then look at the template as a guide, okay? You do not have to put something down under every single one of those categories for every single kid if it doesn't make sense. And if you look at it as a guide, not something that came down from Sinai for you, it allows you to adapt it and cover it in a way that is specific to your case. However, that being said, there's still 4 things you need to be thinking about. Number 1 is safety. Remember, that's how most of these cases open. So you better have something that talks about, are they safe or not safe? Or, hey, things are going okay. Health, because this is where, and I think, Sherry, that might have been one of your questions. Where do I put stuff about, that's behaviorally oriented or that speaks to their mental stability issues? Because you could have a kid that's highly traumatized, and you need to think about, is this being expressed as health issues? And mental health belongs in that health category. 3 is school. We are often the only part of the team that looks at the school performance because we're the ones with A, the time, B, the contacts. And that allows us to really claim that area and use it to judge how our kiddos are doing, to advocate for special services they might need, to see if you can help them make progress, even though their lives are pretty upended by this whole process. And then 4 is what I call the okay factor. Are they happy? Are they sad? Are their behaviors on track, or are they on the edge of what we would consider to be acceptable? Do they have friends? Believe it or not, you'll often have a judge ask you, are they well adjusted in school? Do they eat lunch with people? And this is a way you can talk to your own kiddos. Say, who do you have lunch with? How are things going in the cafeteria? You can even visit, and God help you, you can eat a chili dog in the school system and you will survive. Then what are their relationships with their siblings, if their siblings are with them, or if there are other kids in the home? What are their relationship with their parents? And here we go back to, When do I talk about what a horrible parent we have here? Or when do I talk about things that the parent needs help with? Okay, where can you fit that in? A lot of times it's in that relationship issue. And sometimes this is where I say you have to adapt that template. You have to create a category that talks about how well they're getting along or how well they're not getting along with their friends. This is not an Easter egg hunt, okay? There should be no surprises for anybody else on your team about where you're going in your court report. If the GAL doesn't know that you think this is a lousy placement and you're recommending that we do something about it, you need to improve your communication with your GAL. If you disagree with something that is being done by the caseworker, something that's being done by the therapist, you needed to have at least brought those to the attention of your team beforehand. Don't let them learn about it in your court report. Get it out there. Don't disguise what you're trying to talk about. Someone talked about, well, you know, we have to be so careful. Yeah, you do have to be careful. But careful does not mean indirect. Careful does not mean running away and letting the judge guess at the problem you're trying to identify here. 4, remember that time is passing. These cases are all on a particular time schedule. And if you have an EPP case, that's a case that has a kiddo under the age of 6. That's a slightly different schedule, and you need to be aware of that. But that's where, go back to those recommendations. One of the recommendations is, when should this case be reviewed again? If you think the case would benefit from more intensive review, this is the time to talk about that. If, oh my God, I'm writing a court report every 30 days and there's no change, maybe we need a longer period of time, 45 days, 60 days. The tendency in the court is to think in 60-day increments. So think about, does this case fit that? And if not, this is a time to get out there in those recommendations. Your court report should also help you when the judge calls on you in court to make an oral statement. Please don't ever say, well, it's all in my court report. That implies to the judge, well, you haven't read it, judge, you'd know better. That is not going to win friends and influence people. So don't do something like that, but you can easily say, as I've covered in my court report, I concur with, I support, I disagree with. You know, those are good action words that you can use. If you have concerns or issues, this is the time. And if you've got a list of 25, they're not all of equal importance. Pick the two. That's all they can really focus on. That really would make a difference. We have not been able to get a child fine and this kid is struggling in school. We've not been able to get an evaluation and it's showing up by not getting the right therapeutic support. Whatever is the single biggest hurdle. What if there isn't a big hurdle? And that's Matt's good point. If there isn't a big hurdle and this case is going exactly as it should, Your Honor, things are going well. I'm hoping these parents can complete their treatment plan and we can talk about that at our next court hearing. You know, you don't have to belabor that point. And I think that if you start from where do I want to end up and make sure that you get there. Someone talked about the balance between it sounds so repetitious, or I can't decide between what level of detail. It sounds like I'm putting too much out there. Think about, is it important? Does it lead me to those recommendations? If it's not something that rises to the core of the case, but it does give you insight into the kiddo, judges love to hear what's really going on with the kids. And think about a good story, a good illustration of the point you're making. Remember, we do want it to be fact-based. So when you say, this child is struggling in school, okay, that can mean a lot of things, like they're having food fights in the cafeteria, or they're failing 7 out of 8 subjects. So this is the time where the detail is needed to support how you got to the state that this child is struggling in school. I think that you need to look at, is this repetition or is this detail? Repetition is a bad thing. Detail that supports a recommendation that leads you to how you got there is a good thing. And I think it also helps you differentiate one child from the other. If you got a case with multiple kids, in my mind, they often run together. So you have to find a way to help the judge, the caseworker, the GAL, everybody that's involved, especially if, as in so many of our cases, you have two kids that are doing fine and one that's on fire, and you need to help put the fire out. How do I not slight those two that are doing well and focus on this one kid that's on fire? You cover the very basics with those two kids that are doing well, and you do focus on the kid that's on fire, because he's or she is the one you need to try to bring together the resources or get some help for, or say, it's not working with this kiddo. We've got to have a different approach. So those are just my off the top where I start. And when I'm reading someone else's court report, the first thing I do is flip to the back and read the recommendation. And then it helps me read the court report, because it helps me say, how did you get there? I'm not finding that trail in your court report. Let's think about how we can strengthen the story that you're telling in your court report. Thank you, Becca.
And just a quick supplement to what Barbara said. What I like about Barbara's approach, and she's, I think, one of the best at doing this, is she's about solutions. And and I think the judge is always so impressed with her reports, because she doesn't just, like she said, say, well, this is a mess or that's a mess. Her recommendations are very specific and very targeted, so that we can, as a group, find a solution. So think about it that way and I think it's a wonderful idea to write your recommendations first, because everything will follow. It should be a supplement to what you want out of this case. And if your recommendations are, again, status quo, that's a good sign that your report then is going to be, pretty basic. There's not going to be a lot of back and forth with it, because your recommendations, so you'll sort of know the tone and really how long your report's going to be based on that. If you're finding that I have a lot of recommendations, they're very specific, like we need more tutoring here, this child needs more counseling, whatever those are, you'll find then that will help you write the report, because you know exactly what to say in each category, because it's going to reinforce your recommendation. So I think that's a great way to do it if you're having struggles getting started. And again, like Barbara said, if you have recommendations that are strong and very, almost, maybe challenging something the caseworker wants to do, and yet your report is pretty wishy-washy, that's a good sign that I didn't do my job in the body of the report, conveying to the judge why I think this case is not going well or something needs to be done. So that it does set the tone in many ways. So I think that's wonderful advice, and makes it a lot easier to write. But as someone asked, again, the recommendations are at the end of the report, right before the contact log, and that's where they should be. But writing them first, just in your mind, maybe on paper, and then writing the body of it afterwards, I think is a good way to do it.
I was intrigued by the question about, I've got more than one kid, how do I cover? I've just finished a case with 8 kids. I feel your pain. It's hard when you have multiple kids. And again, that repetition problem. But there are things that are going to be different for each kid. Focus on those. Don't feel you have to say, each kid, you make an entry under each kid, group them together. In this particularly large case, there was a group of younger kids and a group of middle kids and 2 older kids. And so you could say, okay, let's talk about the little ones. They're all safe. None of them are in school. Everybody's been to the doctor. Their health is up to date, blah, 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 blah. You don't have to spend a lot of time on each individual child, again, unless there is an issue that you really want to jump up and down about. And it's absolutely okay to create that category that wants to talk about health. Okay. You can be focused on, all right, the 4 children who are under the age of 4, and that was truly what this case had, they're all doing well. You can then say, we have a middle schooler and a high schooler. We had a middle schooler and 2 high schoolers. So how are they doing? I had an elementary, you can think of them as little groups and try to go forward, but you can make general observations about how they're all doing and then focus on the areas that are different for them. And again, if it's things are going along just fine, we let the parents finish learning some new parenting skills, and then we can talk about maybe closing the case. When you don't have a lot to say because it hasn't changed a lot, then that's what you do. You don't have a lot to say. And you can start, you can put that in there. This CASA has done 4 home visits in this reporting period, and everything is going along. Parents are making progress. We're moving towards the end goal here, and let it go. You don't have to say an individual entry for each kid when there is nothing really new or different. And you can just focus on, and that means your report's going to be a little shorter. Hey, good for you. But if there isn't a lot of change, there isn't a lot of change, and you can't invent change, but you can talk about things that are a little different. And again, when you're looking for where progress is likely to be made or where problems are likely to surface, think in terms of if they're going through counseling, if they're getting mental health help, how's that going? Did they keep their appointments? Did they not keep their appointments? You might not be able to say much about what they're talking about in their therapy, but you can certainly say they had 5 appointments scheduled and managed to make it to 2, or they've been keeping all their appointments and things are going well. That's enough. So I think that, again, think in terms of what is different and what are the areas where you wish you could focus a little more resource for them.
Can I ask a question?
No. What is it, Sherry?
So I have this case where there's been a placement disruption, and now we're into the second placement disruption. And my recommendations have been that he stay in the Metro Denver area, that he get intense therapy. When he had psychological evaluation, the therapist said he needs intense therapy. The judge has ruled on all this and said, yes, yes, yes. It was also recommended he not be placed with more than 2 children. The county placed him east of Colorado Springs in a house with 6 kids. He's not getting intense therapy. He just finally started therapy.
Schools.
He had to change schools. Now they're pulling him out 1 week after that. And the judge has ruled on these things, but the county isn't doing it. It's not the caseworker's fault. It's the county's fault. What do I do? I don't want to totally.
So everybody agreed on this. The caseworker agreed, the GAL agrees, the judge agrees, we all agree on these points, right? But then all of a sudden the county says, well, the only place available is way far away from his kin, away from his school, away from his therapist, and in the wrong kind of home placement, which is now causing another disruption. So it's an interesting scenario. I guess the judge has no jurisdiction over where the county decides to place somebody, obviously.
No.
Yeah, it's often based on need and where they have available beds.
Yeah.
And all you can do, and I saw someone ask the question about how are recommendations enacted. Your recommendations are taken equally with everyone else's. Of course, they may not necessarily turn into court orders. Sometimes they do. Sometimes the judges will enact your recommendations over that of the department, but they're not necessarily enacted. But in this case, you can be as fervent as you want and stress that this placement needs to change and they need to keep looking for a different placement for this child's benefit. And I'm sure they are trying to do that. I don't think they deliberately placed this child in something.
Just happened.
But these things do happen where the placement is, you know, again, where in metro area, especially, they try to do that because of visitation purposes. If there's supervised visitation, it makes it harder for kin to visit if they're placed, you know, 90 miles away or 200 miles away. So they really try to do. So you've done everything as CASA as you can do, which is recommend strongly, continue to hammer that, continue to bring that up. But, you know, this is where the job of being a CASA is so difficult, because you do feel powerless sometimes, that despite my recommendations, despite what we all know is good for this kid, it's not happening. We're dealing with budgets. We're dealing with a bureaucracy. We're dealing with a really, you know, difficult time for foster homes and foster placements. And it's, you know, there's so many hoops you have to jump through, and we want it to be a certain way, and it often isn't. And that's where, again, this becomes hard, because you know what's right for this kid, and it's not happening. But sadly, sometimes that's the reality of what they have to do. But that shouldn't stop you from continuing to challenge that in your reports.
And we do, and everybody is working on it. And you're right, it isn't deliberate, right? And it even frustrates the judge, obviously, right? But,
Yeah.
it is what it is. Okay.
Yeah.
You
Anyway,
don't
thank-
want to make people upset with you in the county, but it's like, come on.
But they agree with you.
Yeah.
They agree. They agree. They just don't have the data. Right? So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's not their fault, and it is this nameless system issue. But the fact of the matter is, you have something to report. This child was placed in a home that doesn't meet his needs, that does not comply with the judge's orders, did not have the support of the team, but it was the only one available.
Yeah.
Right.
But who's to say that because this is what happens, guys, the minute they place a kid, they stop looking. Okay? You want to keep this problem in front of them. You want them not to quit. And I understand they've got more need than they have resources. But you're arguing for one situation and one dedication of resources, okay? Yes, I do understand your problem, however, okay? And I think you have to keep, and it's not like you're throwing them under the bus. This is not like anybody, you're not blaming anybody, but you're saying this placement does not meet this child's needs. It does not conform to the recommendations made earlier, or to your orders, or to the orders that were entered. And we need to keep looking for a better placement for this kid that keeps him here. And I think particularly when, I've got visions. Is this child in Ellicott? I've been to Ellicott. There's a couple of good foster homes down there, but they've got lots of kids in them. And there is no therapy available down there. If you've ever been to Ellicott, it's 2 gas stations and a grocery store. That's it. So you need to say, this is why it's not meeting the needs, and this is showing up in the behavior issues that we're having, our inability to make progress in helping this kid adapt, whatever. But don't give in just because the system has failed this child. You can't change the system, but you might be able to get one child in a better place with the therapy he or she needs to succeed in this process. So just because everybody's tried doesn't, and the answer is still a bad one, keep looking for the better answer for this kid.
The heat is on.
Good. And that's another good question. What if that caseworker isn't doing anything? My biggest frustration is that things seem to disappear into black holes in the county. There's a place, I am sure, that recommendations for intensive therapy go, and they die there. You have to create, in a sense, the institutional memory here. We discussed this before. We're discussing it again. I need you to order it again, Your Honor. It's a little bit better. The county has improved its list of therapists. It's improved its ability to place. You and the GAL might need to have a conversation about, hey, what about using Charlene Slover? Okay, Charlene Slover is not on their list, but she is really one of the best in treating traumatized kids. The court can order the county to put this kid with Charlene Slover. They don't like to, but the court can order this. So you and the GAL probably are going to be on the same page. The caseworker usually can't go against department policy, but can be cheering you on and can be hoping that that's what you're going to do. So again, no Easter egg hunting, but you know, lead them to where you want them to be. And sometimes your job is to put the unpopular recommendation out there that everybody wants to happen, but the county can't support it because it's not their policy. But everybody knows it's what that kid needs. That kid needs ABA therapy. The list is out the door for ABA therapy needs. How do you get your kid jumped up on the list? How do you make sure that your kid is getting the services he or she needs? By being relentless, by being that constant dripping water problem that doesn't go away. So I would just encourage you, Sherry, to keep, you know, you're not throwing it under the bus and you're being respectful, but you are saying this child's needs are not being met and you need to keep looking for a better placement for him.
I sound like a broken record a lot.
That's very good.
And
Very
at this
good.
point, I've said there are 2 people that have been in his life for 2 years. TPR is done. You know, we're the only 2 in his life.
Yep. And you're the only ones who are going to be able to bring that institutional memory forward. He's probably changed. He's probably had 5 caseworkers by now. So you're where that memory resides.
Therefore,
And you're probably before another judge even. So this is where you can create that relentless representation that might help this kid. And that's your goal.
What is ABA that you mentioned before?
ABA is a therapy modality that works particularly with kids that are on the autism scale or have serious behavioral issues. We used to call it behavior modification. Okay, that's what ABA therapy is, where a kid does things and there are immediate consequences. It is very structured. Most ABA therapists see a kid 3 or 4 times a week. It's expensive, but it does produce change, and it's a great tool. That's why the list is so long to get it. There are about 6 good providers, groups that provide it here. The Oliver Group, for instance, or ABA Therapies of the Rockies. And if your kid needs it, you're not going to accept the answer. They're on the list. Okay, what have you done to move this kid forward? When's the last time you checked with? Can I check with the therapy group? What can I do to see that he's moving up on the list? And this is where that relentless quality is going to help you.
What are some of the questions we have in the chat?
It,
Oh, well, I noticed Mandy asked about the, you know, it's similar to what Barbara said, where, you know, like if you bring up an eye exam and just it keeps not happening, that's where, again, as Barbara said, just continue to hammer it every single time. Be that person that doesn't let it alone. It's frustrating because, you know, you feel like I keep bringing this up and nobody listens, but they are listening. It's just you have to again get the judge to make the order, to follow through on the order, and to have the department have the resources to do it, and the availability of a particular therapist or doctor. But just keep bringing it up.
You can be the resource too. This kid's under Medicaid, okay? They are because they're in the system. Does the grandmother or the family member that has custody of this child know which providers do eye exams in their office? They probably don't because nobody's told them. Okay, you can figure that out for them and you can say, okay, grandma, here's a list of 5 that you can call and get an eye exam. Here's a list of 2 that have available appointments. Be the resource if they're not. Then if they're not, you've got a different issue. You've got disregard. Okay, that's when you go hammer them a little bit harder. If you've given them the resources, if you've helped them, then you can easily put in the court report, you know, this is, this child needs an eye exam. If they're struggling in school and you're pointing out they're struggling in school, you know, sometimes vision or hearing issues are why kids struggle in school. And you can say, we're looking for an answer. This CASA has provided a list. It would be helpful if the, you know, if we could direct the grandmother, whoever the custodial person is, to complete this within the next 30 days. And you can then say, and I will call and check and make sure it's been done. You know, again, you can make a recommendation, but how do you give it some teeth, or how do you make sure it happens? Be a resource and be relentless about the follow-up, because if they need an eye exam, they need an eye exam. And when you're making those recommendations happen, think about how you can remove obstacles. And the obstacle is often ignorance. I don't know where to go. The clinic I take him to doesn't offer eye exams. Okay, but there's one 6 blocks down the street that does. Or here's a list of the ones that do. How can we help you? Do you need transportation? Do you know, can we get you some bus tickets? Whatever you can do to remove the obstacles that are keeping that grandma from doing it.
Yeah. So just like I said, I mean, and Barbara, like, I just, being in court with her a lot and hearing her oral recommendations, her number one thing as a CASA is, I'm here to offer solutions. I'm not here just to throw out a problem and then walk away from it, but I'm going to be part of the solution and being as specific as possible as to what those solutions are. That's the greatest job you can do as a CASA. Yes, someone else has to pay for it. Someone else has to get it rolling. But if you offer something specific, then if it's not done, as Barbara said, then that's, you know, neglect on it. And, you know, but if you become part of that, here's an organization, or here's a group, or here's a doctor, or whatever that is, that's a wonderful thing to be able to offer in case someone says, well, I don't know what to do with it. Here's an answer, get it done. And it gives you more credibility, but it makes you, again, part of making this family better. And it goes beyond, you know, you don't have to necessarily be the superstar that Barbara is, you know, and if we use her as an example, I mean, she really does go above and beyond on all of her cases. Don't feel that you have to be, you know, knock yourself out necessarily, but do, you know, use your imagination, use some of your resources in your own life and with people, you know. That sounds like a good idea. Maybe I can refer that, or maybe I can bring this up. I've heard of a doctor that does this. A friend of mine uses them, or some. Just tap your brain to figure out solutions to the problems.
We did have a question about clarification. It seems the confusion on naming the school. In what cases can you name the school? Are there cases that you can name the school? And which leave it out?
I will say, as someone who's edited a million reports, the only time confidentiality is important in a lot of respects. Obviously, you don't want to put addresses and things like that ever. Things like the school name, the number one reason, in fact, the only reason I can think of when we don't put it in is if there's a contested issue where there's maybe a protection order between the children and a parent, and the parent isn't supposed to even know where the kids reside, let alone go to school. So if there's an instance where there's a lot of contention, you know, there's a domestic violence situation or something like that, and again, there's a protection order or a no contact order, you very much want to keep all those things under wraps, because you don't want to tip off a parent who might read the report because their attorney's giving it to them. So we always err on the side of caution with names and addresses for that reason. Particular cases may not have those issues. So if you were to leave, you know, if you said McKinley Elementary in a report and there's no dad even involved, and it's just, then that's not the biggest issue in the world, but you want to look at your case and see if there's any potential issues where a parent or somebody that might be a party to the case isn't supposed to know the physical whereabouts of the kids or the mom or something like that.
And sometimes when you're arguing for something, you need that level of detail. Westminster runs a special school. They're one of the few districts that has a special school for the kids that end up there have either profound physical challenges or profound emotional, mental challenges. Getting into it is really hard. But sometimes what you want to do is to argue that this child needs the type of environment that can be, he's in this school district, but he's in Hopkins Elementary, and he really needs to be in the special school to have his needs met. There's no way to avoid naming the schools that you're talking about there. And as long as you're not in a particular case that I had, the kid was already living at home with his parents. So what's confidential about where they're going to school? And if you're arguing, some schools have more resources for kids with emotional difficulties than other schools. Some schools, if you have a kid who really needs to be at the Stargate school because they are gifted and talented and they're not being able to succeed because they're bored to death in their regular school, there is no way you can avoid talking about he needs to be at Stargate. So you have to have judgment on that one. I don't think other than when you are clearly in the protective mode, because you do have to keep that kid under wraps because you have a parent out of control or whatever. That's one thing. But when it's information that strengthens what you're trying to get done for a kid, or you're trying to make a specific argument, or if you've had to do one of the little hearings that a kid is being moved and you have to do the hearing about where is the best interest of this child served, and you're talking to the two schools, you might have to observe in your court report that you did one of these hearings and the placement decision was to place him with the new in the school close to his new foster family, or to find transportation back to his old school, whatever. Sometimes you can't avoid drawing the lines around what schools you're talking about. And it's a judgment issue. And if you've got a question, pick up the phone and call your SPC or your PC and say, okay, now what? Don't get hung up about, oh, I can't ever name the school, because sometimes it's innocuous, but sometimes it's loaded and you need to use your own judgment. And you're the person probably best able to know, am I crossing the line here or not? Does that help? I was interested in the questions or the issue that a couple of you guys raised about feedback. You've dropped your court report into the great pond and it's created ripples, but you can't even see them. What do you want to know? I would be interested because I know when I'm working with other CASAs and I'm saying, you need to get some of the acronyms out of your court report, because the judge doesn't, the problem is that not everybody uses the same ones. And when you keep saying FOC, what's a fuck? What's a fuck? You need to be a lot more specific. And remember the thing that they taught you way back in high school about when you're going to use initials or something to describe it, the first time you use it, you define what you meant. And so if you're going to say, if you're going to use FOC, then it better say father of child. You know, Mr. Jones, comma, father of child, paren, FOC. Then throughout the rest of the court report, you can use that acronym. But if you're going to use an acronym, everybody better be knowing what you mean by it. So I discourage it only because sometimes I think it's, I don't want to say disrespectful, but let's talk about the exception, of course, I think is, you know, when we're talking about foster parents, we almost always say foster parents. But if you're talking about a relative that's taken the child in, the child is now living with the grandmother. Grandmother's name is Mrs. Ferguson. You should be referring to her as Mrs. Ferguson, not the grandmother of the child. You can you can recognize that this person is making a contribution to the life of this child. And it's more respectful to use their name than to refer to them as "Mom, Mom," whatever. It is also, I think, easier for the judge who sees this kid's case every 60 days. She doesn't remember who Mrs. Ferguson is, but Mrs. Ferguson, comma, grandmother of the child, currently has custody. That helps that judge tie that name you're going to use to the role of this person. Because again, this is you're leading them on a path, and you want to know where you're going, so don't make it hard.
And as a rule for, for me, as far as feedback, at least the way I work with my volunteers is, if I'm going to change the content, then there's go back and forth. If I'm just, changing a comma or the formatting or like Barbara said, where maybe you didn't identify the respondent mother or something like that, those kinds of changes I don't feel are necessary to be a back and forth. But if there's a paragraph of content that I'm not understanding, or I feel like it's too much of opinion and not fact, that's when I will get back in touch with the volunteer to have a back and forth, because I feel it's respectful to, if I'm going to change content, you should have feedback into that to be able to explain what you meant or to be able to rewrite it in some fashion. But I'll be honest with you, and this is good news, and it's a testament to both Becca's training and I think the wonderful people we're getting as volunteers. But the court reports I've been getting is certainly in the last year or two have just been phenomenal. Even first-time ones, the CASAs will tell me, "Oh, I'm so, I'm struggling with this. How do I write this? I haven't written since college," or something like that, and turning in just really good reports. And I think it's our template is a good one. I think it asks the questions. It's a good guide, as Barbara said. You don't have to answer every question, but it's a good guide. But I just think I think you guys are just you're really hitting it out of the park. And I think you sometimes talk yourself into thinking this is going to be more difficult than it is. But if you just keep focusing on, the judge doesn't meet these children. The judge doesn't know these children. I do. What can I do to convey to the judge, here's who Johnny is, or here's who Mary is as a child, what their situation is, their likes, their dislikes, where are they going in life, how's their grades, what moves them, what do they want to be when they grow up, all those sorts of things. You're painting a picture, and if you keep focused on that, it's going to write itself, because you know these kids, you care about these kids, and that's going to come through in the writing. But like I said, I don't want to jinx it, but I haven't gotten a bad report in quite a long time, honestly. It's been wonderful to read. So I think you guys just have the confidence to know that as long as you are telling the truth and telling the judge what this kid is like, so that they can get an understanding of them and meet them through your report, you're going to do fine. You really are. It's not like writing a master's thesis here. It's the best kind of writing. It's personal. It's from the heart, and it's meaningful. So I have great confidence in what's been going on lately.
And here's a tip that I picked up from Jennifer Cushman. I don't know how many of you've met Jennifer. She's one of our truly outstanding volunteers. Jennifer takes pictures of her kids and attaches them to her court report. It proves the bond, I think, that she has with these kids. Of course, you're going to always ask the parents' permission, or the foster parents' permission, or whoever's got the kids. I'd like to take a picture of Stuart and Mary. Is that okay with you? And especially the ones that have really impacted me is when she's taking a picture of kids holding the certificate they got for being the best reader in the 3rd grade this month, okay, or something that helps her show this kid. And I would encourage all of you to do that. It was, first of all, Judge Delgado eats it up. And so does Judge Pugh. I've had Blackett hold them up and say, "These look like happy kids, they must be doing well. So think about a picture is worth 1,000 words sometimes. If on the other hand, you got a really unhappy kiddo, okay, that often comes across too. You know, you got 3 kids like this and one, unless it's a 15-year-old and they always look like that, then I think that pictures can be very helpful to you in showing the judge, this is the child I'm talking about. This is why we want to get him into a better school. This is why this kid needs a better placement. This is why this kid is doing so well, and I'm telling you, we're headed in the right direction. Help yourself a bit here and attach a picture. Everybody's phone has a picture. Even an action picture. We did a driveway visit recently with that case with the 8 kids. And we were throwing a ball around in the driveway, okay? And the picture of all 8 kids standing in the circle was really kind of fun. Even the newborn was in the baby carrier right there. So it's a good thing to attach a picture and help yourself paint that bigger picture you're trying to paint about how well a child is doing or where we're headed, or just reminding them, I told you this kid was really tall, and helps you sometimes gather resources for a kiddo. So whip out that camera phone.
Oh, and one thing
Judge Legato had Sherry bring her kiddos in to meet her in chambers, and that was terrific. What a difference that made. Oh.
Yeah, how many of you have taken a kid to visit the judge? Especially if a case is stalled or it's going on and on. Some of you seem to have a few of those. If the kid is over about the age of 8 to 10, something, you know, and you're going to have to judge what's this kid's maturity level. Can they handle it? Most judges love it, and it helps you. I know in this recent case with a very troubled kiddo who is now in that special Westminster school, that was the turning point. The judge got a chance to meet this kid. That really helped. She began supporting, you know, we've got to get that kid into a special school. He needs more help than he's getting. So do you know how to do that? Start by talking to the GAL. Have them join you in making the recommendation to the judge. We'd really like you to meet Stuart. Becca, you had a question?
A couple of things. Laura asked, where do you suggest to attach the picture on the court report?
At the very end.
Okay.
And make it a picture that's big enough, you know, blow it up enough so she can actually see the kids. And it's just
one thing I had a CASA do. Well, that CASA do that was great. It was the one I spoke about where she would add on to each one because the case was so long. She would insert the pictures within the body of it, and she would it'd be a chronology. So her final report that she turned in for the case showed the kid as a 5-year-old and ended up as an 8-year-old. So there was this, you could read the report and see this child grow up before your eyes because of the pictures. I think that's a good idea too, is to attach a different photo each time with a different context. You know, like I said, an action shot or them in school, because these cases may stay open a year or two. And when you look back on them from the judge's perspective, again, it's like you are watching them grow up. And the surefire way to get a comment from a judge is to include a picture. I've never seen one yet that didn't thank the CASA for doing that, because again, they don't get to meet these kids usually. So I think that's always a good idea, and it makes them more human. I mean, these are kids' lives we're talking about here, and the picture is a powerful way, because you do get a lot through facial expressions and through just how they're looking in that particular moment in time.
So then I had a personal question, and that is, you mentioned taking the kids to see the judge. How is that even done in this format? Can they schedule a Zoom call?
It isn't now. Yeah, they have to appear by Zoom. There's a lot of kids who some of them are older, but they'll just join the call. And so, but the GALs, they might invite them in, and depending on their age, it may be appropriate or may not be appropriate. But what they've done is they'll appear in the hearing, and then they'll talk with the judge in private after the hearing's over through Zoom or something like that. But yeah, the in-person in chambers thing is going to be on hold for a bit, but they can still meet them through Zoom, and I think that's, again, if they're old enough to understand, yeah, I think it's a good idea.
My Judge Delgado requested to meet my kids, and when they met them, and then Peter, the gal, followed up, and that's how we ended up doing it. But they were going to TPR at that time,
So
and
the
she
kids are never
wanted
in
to
the
talk
hearing.
to them.
Yeah, they're
They've never been in a hearing.
Judge Delgado often wants to meet the kids, especially when she's going to make a very impactful decision.
Mhm.
She wants to see whose life she's screwing with.
Yeah.
And you can suggest it. You will also find that adolescents are a lot more curious, and they are really resentful of someone making decisions about them that they don't know. And that's, again, it's a good conversation point to have with a kiddo who's 14 and struggling, and you know where we're going. Would you like to, what would you, and then prep them a little bit. Don't just kind of throw them in there. You might want to talk to the judge about how school is going. You might want to talk to the judge about you miss your sister and you wish you could see her more. Whatever. Don't let them just go in there and freeze, because they don't know what to expect. And I know I've taken a lot of kids, and you want to make them feel comfortable, because the judges do go out of their way and they try to come down to the level. It's easier when you're 5'0" like Judge Delgado. A lot of the kids are taller than she is, but give them a sense of what they're going to, what the interaction is going to feel like. And sometimes it's a really good when you've got an angry teenager whose sense of, I have no control over all this stuff that's happening in my life. This is a point of control. You get to meet the person. You get a chance to talk for yourself. So how do you get that to happen? First of all, talk to the GAL, and then you can bring it up at the hearing. I've been known to call up Sandy, Judge Delgado's clerk, and say, we could really use a meeting. And boy, she sets it up. But right now, a Zoom meeting, they're going to school on Zoom. They know how to do this. So I think and sometimes it's even better for them. They feel, they like the remoteness, but they like the opportunity. So just because we're doing it differently, don't be dissuaded by that.
So this is from Linda. Is it appropriate to provide a picture of a child with foster parents, other foster children not related to the child?
No. You should do your best to have it just be the child or someone who's a party to the case. Foster parents should remain anonymous, both in name and in face, for obvious reasons, sometimes for protective reasons, but as best you can, and certainly not to have any other kids in there that aren't part of the case. If you can't get a picture of them just alone, then I wouldn't include one. But if it's with respondent mother, of course, respondent father, of course, their uncle they're staying with, of course, but not anybody who's not directly a party to the case. Was that the only other question that was on there?
That was the most recent one, yeah.
Okay. Let's see. So, any other questions? Does anybody feel who has written a report, I would say, that they feel like they have ways to improve, or do they feel pretty comfortable with their report writing, or is there a particular question you had that you feel you haven't answered that would improve your report? I think that's we have a lot of people in here who have written some, and I think that's a good thing. But just to assess your own reports, do you think that it sounds like you've been doing them the right way and submitting reports that you like, or has this revealed things about your reports that you feel you've been lacking?
And I think Matt was really right when he said, a lot of times CASAs make this into a great big hurdle. Oh, I have to write a court report. It's not. And the first time you do it, the first time you do it on any case is the hard one. And after that, it gets easier. If for no other reason, you've already created the little template and you filled in all the stuff. But it does get easier with practice. One of the things that I found with the CASAs I'm working with, if you're struggling, talk to your SPC, talk to your peer coordinator and say, ugh, this is the part I hate most about it. It's always such a struggle. I have a little selection of 5 of them that I say, okay, you can come over and we'll sit here and you can read through these and you can see I've got 1 bad one and 4 good ones that you can see run the gamut of, this is just routine business, same as last month, now what? How do I avoid throwing the caseworker under the bus? Or how do I do it and not have it come back and bite me in the butt? Okay, here is an example of how you can get there. But if you need help, don't wait till the report is 2 days late. Okay, raise your hand and we'll sit down and we'll say, okay, let's talk about a specific thing. You're having trouble framing a recommendation. You're having trouble not throwing the caseworker under the bus. Well, maybe you need to. But let's do it in a way that is respectful. So I think that don't let this become a big mountain you have to climb. It's not that hard, and it's not something that we can't help you with, because there are some really good examples of it. And we can help you even here. All right, here's some suggested language you might want to use. And I'd rather do that before you sit down and start writing the report than, okay, how do I tactfully tell you this sucks? So let us help you if you're struggling, and let us help you before you have to jump over the hurdle. That's just easier for everybody. Any other questions?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
During this pandemic time, I have not gone to a lot of the personal visits that the caseworker or GAL have gone to. I've started to go to just one recently, but in the past, I have not. So my interaction with the kids has mainly been through like a Google chat or a Zoom chat. And I'm seeing the best of them at that point. They're happy and they're just talking to me about, what they're playing with. But then I always ask for the reports that the caseworker and GAL get after their visits. And it's full of a lot of information that maybe I didn't know, that maybe the kids were struggling with certain things. And so when I'm writing my report, sometimes I feel guilty, but I'm actually kind of pulling some information from the other reports and kind of adding it to mine to give kind of a full picture. Is that cheating when
Well,
I'm kind of taking information from everybody else just to make mine seem a little bit more comprehensive?
Well, I mean, as long as you're attributing it to the proper source, that's perfectly fine. And I have a lot of CASAs who supplement with their own perspective. And I think it's important especially if you have a good relationship with your team, to get their point of view. How are their visits going? How, Zoom or in person? And to say, my visits have been such, but according to the caseworker, this is this. As long as you're, again, attributing it to the proper party, I think it makes for a much better report to have those different points of view, because it demonstrates to the judge not only are you doing your job, but they are as well, and you're collaborating and you're coming to some sort of conclusion. I think I've learned, on my own case, for example, I learned things from the caseworker based on their visits. Caseworker learned something from me. GAL learned something from us both. The kids might react to you differently just because of who you are, your personality. Your personality is different from the caseworker. I have a lot of kids who open up to the CASA and don't like the caseworker. I've had kids openly say, I don't like that Mrs. Smith who comes over. I don't like her. And so you just never know when personalities clash or click. So it's very important, I think, to include all those things. It's not cheating at all. It's very much, it would be cheating if you attributed it to yourself and your own point of view. But as long as you're identifying who says those things, I think it makes for a better report.
And again, it helps you support them sometimes. As reported by the caseworker, Stuart keeps banging his head against the wall, okay, whatever, or is, according to the school records, he has been in 3 fights, okay? You didn't witness them, but you are painting the picture of this child. And you are, I think, as Matt's saying, you're giving a fuller picture, and you are helping everybody know that folks are doing their job here. They're out there, they're visiting with them, they're talking to them, they're observing, they're turning over the rocks to see what's underneath them. And as long as you are real clear that while the CASA did not personally observe this, whatever, then I think it does add heft and observable in the sense of documented type of observations into a report. And it's good. It's a good thing. Again, you're part of a team. And here, when you're helping the rest of your team paint that same picture of the kid, even if you didn't observe it, but it's part of what's going on in the case, then I think it's very helpful.
And it brings up a lot of interesting questions. I mean, if your perspective of this child and this family is vastly different from someone else on the team, you guys need to have a conversation, a conference call, something to say, why am I seeing something that you're not? Or why are you seeing that? That can lead to an interesting conversation. And from time to time that's happened. And it could be you catch a kid on a particular day, the family's in a particular mood, whatever it is, but it also could be that the kid is being deceptive or the family's being deceptive. You never know. And you'll never know unless you guys compare notes. I'm really, the number one thing I get frustrated at is we always tell our CASAs to share their visits, with a quick email to their team. Here's how it went. Here's some observations that we don't in kind get the same from them. I wish more of them would, because it would help along the process, especially when you get deep into a case and you have different points of view. A lot of that could have been addressed if you had just shared notes. So we're doing our best on our side to encourage the professionals. Please, please, please let your CASAs know how your visits are going. Respond to their emails when they email you. It just helps keep problems from festering.
May I say something? I found that the first thing I've done is always try to communicate with the gal and the caseworker and always report to them what I observe every time I see the kids or talk to them.
Absolutely.
And if you do that, then they start going back and giving you what they're observing, and you become a team. And if you don't communicate, then you're just this individual who's just spouting off stuff, but you don't have the whole story.
Yeah.
Gotta
You
bring
have to
value.
do your part. You have to do your part, absolutely. And if you start the case off with that, even if you don't get something back every time, keep it up. Keep sending that email out, because like you said, there's a paper trail. So
Yeah.
if someone comes back and says, well, wait a minute, why Joe is doing what? I didn't know that. You could say, well, of course you know that. I sent you I'm sending you emails about what this kid is doing. So you should never have it said of you that you didn't convey important information to your team. As long as you're doing that, even if they don't do it in kind, keep it up. Make that be the consistent.
But any team to make a team work, you have to build rapport, right? And it's that beginning part of first listening to learn, right? And be a great listener, and then bring value to that team and keep giving value. And the more value you bring, that the more rapport you will build. And once you build that rapport, I mean, this team you got going here is just an amazing group of people who talk, twice a day. It's crazy, but it's wonderful when it works that way.
Yeah. And most are pretty good.
And remember, you have other partners out there that you might not have even identified. If you have a kid in foster care, odds are the foster care is provided through a contracting agency. There are a smaller number that are direct clients of the county. That foster care agency does a once a month check-in with the foster parent, with oftentimes the GAL will be part of that. Get yourself invited. Figure out how to enlarge your team and add value to it. You will hear things in that discussion that you're not going to get any other time. And I love working with the visits that foster agencies are doing with their client, because that's when you can figure out sometimes an unreported need. We really do need to get this kid out of this school. He's bored. And when he's bored, he's fighting. It helps you identify, again, things you might be able to add value to, but paints a bigger picture. So don't forget that your team is larger. There's a second tier, and sometimes there's a third tier. If whatever you're working on together, the more people that have resources and ideas that you bring to the table, the faster you're going to be able to plug in needs that your kids have. So think of your team. Here's my primary team. Here's my secondary team. Here's the tertiary team, whatever. But make yourself part of more circles, because you're going to learn more and you're going to bring more resources to the table for your kiddo.
I found one thing that really helped too is I've gone on visits with the kids. I've met the gal there, I've met the caseworker, and that builds your rapport with them, so you become part of that team. And they defer to me a lot of times because they say, well, you see the kids more than anybody, especially when you've gone with them.
Many of your GALs have their own social worker on their team. They're paying someone to go out and do observational visits for them and sort of cross off some of the typical caseworker types of things. Be sure you ask your GAL. Megan Curtis has one. Mary McWilliams has one. Ask if they're, ask your GAL, hey, do you have a social worker on your staff? Sometimes they share them, and team up with them and go on a visit with them, because they're going to ask different questions. And it does two things. Number one, you're decreasing the demand on time from the foster home or the caregiving parents or the real parents if the kids are placed there. And you'll get a little less resistance from them if there's 4 visits a month instead of 24 visits a month. So figure it out and partner up with somebody to do a visit together with them. You'll learn something, but you'll have even more observations yourself. You're going to be able to see, how does that kid respond? That surly teenager was really nice to that guy, but I can barely drag 5 words out of him. Okay, that tells me, maybe we need to think about ways we can increase this guy's contact with other males, with good role model males. It will help you have a better understanding of the dynamics in your kiddo's life and things that are going on. So build your team. It's bigger than the 2 names that we gave you when you opened the case. Here's your caseworker. Here's your GAL. There are more people on your team. There are also teachers and counselors that often have insights into these kids. You might have a therapist who is able and willing to speak with you. You can have a home therapist, and they're always willing to speak with you. So build your team and use their observations and put them in your court report, because that, again, helps present a better picture. It's more complete, and it helps you. I think you just learn more that way, and it's more fun. The more you know, the more fun these cases are.
I did want to address the chat. So Linda asked for clarification. Does the CASA participate in the meeting with the judge? I assume if you're setting it up on Zoom. And does the judge provide feedback to the CASA caseworker about the meeting?
you as a
I've always participated, and this goes to your relationship with the GAL. And I know I had once when they didn't invite me and the judge made them invite me. But it really does go to your relationship with your GAL. And oftentimes you are the suggesting moving party. Hey, I think it would be real helpful. This teenager is kind of confused. Could we set up a meeting? And here are the dates I'm available. So make yourself part of the process. You should be included. Most GALs make it automatic.
And then Bob had a question about the reports. Do they get translated for the parties if the party does not speak English?
That has to be
Seen a word for word written translation, but I have seen the translator who comes to court reading it to a parent. I think a lot of that would depend on whether or not the parent requested it.
Yeah. I've seen attorneys stand up in court and they have said the family services plan that the department, we need to get this translated into a particular language. And if they request the court, my guess is, I mean, I hate to say this, my guess is they don't. There's respondent parent counsel. Oftentimes, if I had to guess of who doesn't read the court report, it's the respondent parent counsel most of the time. So I'm not sure they're going to ask to have it translated. They're more concerned with the caseworker's report. Again, a lot of the counsel do read, but I think that's the primary reason is they're just not requesting it. And if they're not requesting it, that means they may just be feeding a few highlights to the parents and not the full thing. Usually, it's always interesting with respondent parent counsel, and like I said, in reading the reports, when the reports they only tend to mention a CASA when the report's good, reflects well on the parents. But funny how they never mention the reports at all in court, or sometimes even badmouth CASAs when the report reflects poorly on the parents. So it's an interesting dynamic how that works. But yeah, again, that question, I really don't think I don't know of any cases where they have translated it. Anything else?
I'm going to hit on one issue before we draw to a close. Let me tell you the first thing that I noticed that is often not taken care of by the CASA that's writing the report. We're using the template. This is the 8th report we've written, so we're just, we just sort of wipe out all the verbiage and plug in the new stuff. The thing that people tend to not look at is that the language at the very beginning, the template. They forget to change the date. What's the date of this report? Oh, August, it's December. So you can tell, and it's just carelessness. So train yourself to read the whole thing front to back. Start at the top and make sure you've got, we've changed caseworkers. Oh, I forgot to put the new name in. They've changed attorneys. Oh, forgot to put the name in. Do that yourself. Teach yourself that you're responsible for the standard language as well as the important language. And second, we have a little less flexibility these days with timing. Poor Matt had to put up with lots of, I know it's only 4 days before court, but here's the report, because things change. And even if you're holding on to a report because we've got a family team meeting and I'm expecting to learn something, we have less flexibility right now because we are submitting these things electronically and there's nobody over there to walk the report into and hand it to Sandy. Hey, will you get this into Judge Delgado's stack? You have to be responsible, and you're going to get bugged by your peer coordinator or your SPC to get your reports in on time. So it's normally we could be a bit more flexible. We've lost that flexibility in the current environment. So help yourself and get yourself off the whiners list by turning your report in on time.
I think we've got time for one or two more questions if you guys want to go ahead and unmute and ask a question.
I think I'd like to offer a little takeaway. I've realized something that I can improve on. One of the things is at the beginning of the case, have this set of recommendations based on a lot of new learnings about the child. And then I find that as time goes on, my recommendations don't change. Those things haven't changed, but maybe nothing has been done with them. But that doesn't mean my recommendations change. But then I'm realizing that I haven't kept all that same information in the reports from the beginning. And so really looking at the recommendations that I wrote and then making sure that there's content still in the report, even if nothing's changed. So that's a great takeaway for me.
Yeah, if you, again, think of this as a roadmap. If I don't get there through this verbiage, then how can you support what you said was a recommendation? So help yourself, help the reader to follow the path you're leading them down.
And maybe for me, that means keeping information in the report that
It
from the
could be.
beginning that I deleted because it wasn't new.
Yeah, and just because it wasn't new, and we're back to, we need an eye exam. Okay, maybe this is the fourth report that you're banging on about the eye exam. Sometimes people will decide to make the problem go away because they're tired of hearing about it. And I don't care why they decide to make it go away. If they're just trying to get rid of me, fine, works for me. So you do sometimes have to, the difference between being repetitive and being detailed. Okay, that falls in the detail. It's the detail that helps you support that recommendation you're making.
I have a quick question. In my case, they're two siblings. They were together. Now they're not. The one sibling, the younger sibling, her aunt still wants to adopt her. Everything is perfect going with her. The other one is the one that is melting down and being moved constantly. And that's what's resulting in the 30-day, every 30 days we're going to court. Do I have to write a court report on her, even though we're really discussing him? I mean, nothing's changed for her.
She's still a named kiddo in the case. She's still in the case, but be real upfront. You know, Susan is doing well. Da 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 da. Her health is fine. Her school is fine. Da 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 da. And then you're done. And
Okay.
you're going to focus on Anthony. Okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to be nearly as exhaustive or as detailed about the kid who is functioning well.
Yeah, nothing's changed in her life.
You do
Yeah.
that with the whole italics theory, right?
Yeah.
Which is you have your base report that has all that historic information and just lead off with everything's good with, you know, with her, and here's all the stuff that's changed in italics with the other guy.
Which
Yeah,
is
it goes to
I have
be-
a lot of
20
reports.
pages.
Yeah. However,
I have a lot of reports that are turned in where there's numerous kids, and maybe one or two of those kids, the attention's on them, and the other kids, you know, some of them wonder why they're even on the case because there's no issues going on. It's perfectly fine, like I said, add a sentence or two, and then
Yep.
move to the priority. But I think, like Barbara said, you should always include them on the report and make mention of them. But by no means do you have to fill out answer every one of those questions for them if there's no issues going on. That's perfectly fine just to bring them up and move on.
Yeah, because it gets really time consuming
yeah, and
going through.
don't waste the reader's time either.
Yeah.
You know, the
Mhm.
sense of, hey, she's doing well, things are working for her. However, we need to
Yeah.
focus on Anthony.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's been my question, especially at 30 days. I mean, nothing's changing for her.
Well, and certainly we appreciate that you write one every 30 days. You certainly don't have to. So that's wonderful you're doing that. But they can be, like I said, consider them as addendums. You don't have to write the whole full thing over again.
Yeah. Well, so much is changing every 2 weeks,
Okay.
every day. I had 30 hours probably in the last 2 weeks just dealing with all this stuff.
Wow. So yeah, it's certainly warranted then.
Yeah.
Great discussion, you all. Feel free to reach out to myself or any of the staff if court report writing is still not coming together for you. And we'll definitely help you out. But your first stop should probably always be your SPC. For the most part, we think no news is good news, right? If you're not hearing back, probably everything's going pretty well. And that your court report, if it didn't need a lot of revision and you're not hearing back from your SPC, that's probably a really good thing.
I will never turn in a report that I think needs addressing. I mean, I'll always, and all our other folks will, PC and SPC. If there's something not right, we will come back to you. So if you don't hear from us, like you said, your report is, and I know a lot of CASA's like, well, I needed you to tell me that. And most of the time I will say that was a wonderful report, thank you. But if you don't hear back, it's because your report was pretty good and addressed everything in the issue.
I appreciate the feedback that some of you are waiting to hear. Oh, okay, that's my bad. I should have said something about, hey, great report. However, next time, would you please make sure you've read all the garbage at the front and get the right date on there. So that's good feedback from you guys as the recipients, that we can do a better job making you know where you stand.
Yeah. No news is equivalent of a gold star, right? Good. I think we have time for one last question if there is one. If not, we can start wrapping up. I really do appreciate it. I think we did a really good job at protecting confidentiality, so I'm going to be able to use this in the future, which makes me very happy. Thank you all for doing that. Yeah, is there any last minute questions that didn't get addressed in the course of this training? Great. Well, Matt and Barbara, thank you again for hosting us, and I think this was really good. If nothing else, it's very supportive and encouraging. I think as I move forward in pre-service in explaining to new CASAs what to expect, and then we'll have this in the library for future use.
Yeah, and
dear,
I'd like to certainly thank everybody for coming. Appreciate you taking time out of your day, and thank Barbara especially. She's a pleasure to work with and a fountain of wisdom, and so we're very lucky to have her. And thank you very much for giving of your time this afternoon.
Well, thank you for all of your advice over these years, Matt. It's made me better. And again, I have not killed a parent yet.
Yay!
Matt deserves a lot of that credit.
Thank you so much. It was
Thanks,
great.
Barb. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you,
you,
guys.
Rebecca.